I'm done betting my future on your dreams, she said while removing our vacation photos from the living room wall. I quietly packed mine. 10 months later, she accidentally heard coworkers celebrate my latest achievement during their lunch break conversation. Mara had already taken down the second photo by the time I walked into the living room. The Sedona one. The one where the sun was doing that thing where it turns everything orange and you can't tell if it's beautiful or if the camera just messed up the exposure. She was holding it against her stomach, frame and all, looking at the empty rectangle on the wall like it owed her an explanation. What are you doing? She didn't turn around. I'm done betting my future on your dreams. I stood there for a second like the sentence needed translating. It didn't. I understood every word of it. The argument had already burned through most of what either of us had left to give it. 20 minutes earlier, we'd both been raising our voices in the kitchen about the offer letter, about the pay cut, about whether either of us actually knew what we were doing. What was left now was this. Her at the wall. Me in the doorway. Both of us too tired to say any of it a second time. Mara, I mean it, Daniel. She set the frame down on the couch, face down, like she couldn't look at it anymore either. I've been thinking about this for a while. Longer than you'd probably want to know. How long is a while? She finally looked at me. Not angry. That was the part that got me. If she'd been angry, I could have matched it, found my own anger somewhere, and used it as a place to stand. But she just looked tired, the way she got after a double shift at the clinic. Except this had nothing to do with work. Since the offer letter, she said. The one sitting on the kitchen table right now. The one we'd just spent 20 minutes arguing about. I wanted to ask her why she hadn't said any of this an hour ago, back when we were still shouting about the pay cut and the timeline. Instead of letting the argument go quiet, and then walking in here to start taking frames off the wall. But I didn't ask any of that. I just watched her reach up and take down the third photo, the one from her cousin's wedding, both of us mid-laugh at some joke I couldn't remember anymore. You don't have to do it right now, I said. Take the photos down, I mean. We can talk first. I don't want to talk first. Her voice cracked on the word first, just barely, and she cleared her throat like she was annoyed at her own body for doing that. If we talk first, I'll talk myself out of it again. I've done that 3 times already. 3 times. I didn't say anything. There wasn't really a good response to finding out your girlfriend had almost left you 3 separate times without telling you. She kept working, corner to corner, careful, like she still cared whether the frames got scratched. There was something almost worse about that, the care. If she'd ripped them down, I could have called her cruel. Instead, she was gentle about ending us, and gentleness felt like its own kind of verdict. Can I say something? I asked. You can say whatever you want. I'm not asking you to bet on a dream. I already have the job. It's not a maybe anymore. It's a maybe on whether it works out. It's a maybe on the pay cut lasting 6 months instead of 2. It's a maybe on us being able to afford the apartment if your commission structure doesn't hit until next spring. She wasn't yelling. She was listening, like she'd rehearsed it, which she probably had, 3 times, alone, in her head. I can't keep living inside somebody else's maybe. So what? You want me to turn it down? I want, she stopped. Pressed the heel of her hand against one eye. Quick, like she was stopping something before it started. I don't know what I want anymore. That's the problem. I used to know. I looked at the wall. For rectangles of slightly less faded paint where the frames had been, like scars from a version of us that used to hang there. I'll get a box, I said. She looked at me, surprised, like she'd expected more of a fight. Maybe she'd wanted one. Maybe some part of her needed me to argue, so she could feel like she wasn't the only one who cared enough to make noise. I didn't have it in me. I walked to the hall closet, pulled down the flattened moving boxes we still had from the day we moved in together, and started packing my own things before she could finish packing away the evidence that we'd ever mattered to each other. Neither of us said the rest of what needed saying that night. That would come later, in pieces, over the next few days. But that was the moment it actually ended. Not with a slammed door or a thrown plate. Just a woman quietly curating a wall, and a man quietly filling a box, both of us moving around each other like strangers who happen to share a lease. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. 3 years earlier, Mara used to leave sticky notes on the bathroom mirror. Nothing profound. Have a good day. Don't forget the dentist. Once, memorably, just an arrow pointing down toward the sink where she'd left half a bagel because she knew I'd skip breakfast otherwise. I kept some of them in a drawer for longer than I probably should have. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue in a backyard in Wheat Ridge, one of those early September evenings in Denver where the heat finally breaks and everybody pretends they planned the timing on purpose. She was the one arguing with somebody about whether pineapple belonged on pizza, dead serious, like the fate of the argument actually mattered to her. I liked that about her immediately. She committed to things. "You're not saying anything," she said to me at one point, handing me a beer I hadn't asked for. "Pineapple. Yes or no?" "I don't have strong feelings about pizza." "Everybody has strong feelings about pizza. You're hiding." She wasn't wrong. I'd always been the guy who kept his opinions folded up small, easier to carry that way. Mara didn't fold anything. She told me on our third date that her dad had run 2 businesses into the ground before she turned 20, a landscaping company and then a used car lot, and that she'd learned to read a bank statement before she learned to drive. She said it plainly, no self-pity in it, just information. This is who I am. This is what shaped me. I told her about my dad too, eventually. How he used to introduce me at family functions as still figuring things out, even after I graduated, even after I got the job at the logistics company, like nothing I did would ever fully land as an accomplishment in his eyes. She didn't try to fix it. She just said, "That's a shitty thing to hear about yourself," and left it there, which somehow helped more than any pep talk would have. We moved in together after a year and 4 months. I remember the exact number because she brought it up once, joking that most people wouldn't be able to say that, and I told her most people weren't counting. Those first 2 years, our apartment on Sherman Street felt like the safest place I'd ever lived. She made a lasagna every 3rd Sunday because it was the only recipe she trusted herself with, and I always said it was the best one yet, and she always called me a liar, and we both knew I meant it. It was a Tuesday night, maybe 8 months before the vacation photos came down, when I first mentioned wanting something different for work. Nothing dramatic. Just an offhand comment while we did dishes, me washing, her drying. The radio playing something neither of us was really listening to. "I think I want to try for something more on the strategy side eventually. Get out of pure ops." I watched her in the reflection of the window over the sink. Her hands kept moving, drying the same plate a beat longer than it needed. Like what though? I don't know yet. Something where I'm building things instead of just keeping the trains running. "Okay," she said. "Light. Easy. As long as it's not, like, a total leap." You know how I feel about total leaps. I didn't know. She'd told me about her dad's landscaping company failing during her sophomore year of high school, how the repo truck came for the pickup while she was doing homework at the kitchen table, how her mother had to explain to a 15-year-old why there wasn't going to be a class trip that year. I understood exactly what a total leap meant to her. "It won't be," I said. "I'm not that guy." She smiled at that, a real one, and bumped her hip against mine on the way to put the plate away. "Good. I like the guy I've got." I believed her completely. I had no reason not to. That was the strange thing about the version of Mara from back then. She wasn't lying to me on Sherman Street. She meant every bit of it. It just turned out that not a total leap had a much smaller definition in her head than it did in mine, and neither of us had bothered to check. The listing was still open on my laptop when Mara walked past the kitchen table 8 months before everything ended. Senior operations strategist. A logistics firm downtown, close enough to walk to on nice days. The kind of role that would actually use the parts of my brain that felt unused after 4 years of the same ticketing system and the same Monday stand-up. I hadn't applied yet. I was still deciding whether I even wanted to. "You're looking at jobs again," she said. "Not a question. Just looking. You said that last time too." She set her bag down on the counter, started unloading groceries, the Trader Joe's bags, the ones that always seemed to have more spinach than we ever actually ate. "What's the pay like?" I turned the screen slightly toward her, which I probably shouldn't have done, because the number sitting under salary range was about 11,000 less than what I made now, at least to start. She didn't say anything for a second, just kept putting away groceries, can of tomatoes, box of pasta, the milk going in the door of the fridge exactly where it always went. "That's a pretty big pay cut," she said finally. "It's a different kind of role. There's room to move up fast. There's room to move up fast at your current job too. If you actually went for the team lead thing Steve mentioned in March. That's not the same, and you know it." "Do I?" She closed the fridge harder than she needed to. Not a slam, just firmer than usual, the kind of sound that says something without anybody having to raise their voice. "I'm not trying to be difficult, Daniel. I'm asking a real question. What's different about this one besides the title sounding cooler? That one landed somewhere it shouldn't have been allowed to land." I felt my jaw tighten before I decided to let it. "It's not about the title." "Okay, then what's it about?" I didn't have a clean answer ready, which made me angrier than the question itself did. I knew what it was about, somewhere under my ribs, but I hadn't practiced saying it out loud, not even to myself. It was about wanting to walk into a Monday and feel like the work asked something of me. It was about being 31 and still hearing my father's voice sometimes, still figuring things out, and wanting one clean data point that proved him wrong. It's about wanting to do something I'm actually good at instead of something I'm just used to, I said, which was true, but came out smaller than it felt inside my chest. Mara leaned against the counter, arms crossed, not in a defensive way, more like she was bracing for a conversation she didn't want to have twice. I hear that, she said. I do. But we've got the renter's insurance renewal next month, and my student loan payment restarted in January. And if this doesn't work out in 6 months, we're not exactly sitting on a cushion. I know what our finances look like, Mara. I do the budget with you every month. Then you know an $11,000 cut isn't nothing. It's not supposed to be nothing. It's supposed to be worth it. Worth it to who? The question sat there in the kitchen, ugly and honest, longer than either of us wanted it to. I didn't mean it like that, she said, softer after a second. I needed to make sense on paper too. Not just in your gut. Okay, I said, because I didn't know what else to say, and because some part of me had already decided the conversation was over even though nothing had actually been resolved. I closed the laptop. Didn't apply that night. Told myself I'd revisit it later, when the timing made more sense, when she'd had more time to get used to the idea. I didn't tell her that closing the laptop felt like closing something in myself too. Some small door I'd have to work harder to open again later. She came over and kissed the top of my head on her way to start dinner, like the conversation had ended somewhere fine for both of us. I let her think that. It was easier than telling her it hadn't. The rent increase notice came on a Thursday, taped to our door instead of emailed, which somehow made it feel more personal. $210 more a month starting in July. Mara read it twice, standing in the hallway before she even took her shoes off. They can't just do that, she said, though we both knew they absolutely could. That same week, her father called twice. She took both calls in the bedroom with the door mostly closed, which she didn't used to do. I caught pieces of it anyway, her voice going flat and careful the way it did whenever she talked to him. The particular silence that came after she asked how much and didn't get an answer she liked. He wants to borrow money again, she told me afterward, sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her scrubs from the clinic. For the truck. Says it's the transmission this time. Are you going to give it to him? I don't know yet. She rubbed her eyes. I always end up giving it to him. That's the part that scares me. I know how this goes and I still do it every time. I sat down next to her, close enough that our shoulders touched, and for a second it felt like the old version of us. The one that told each other everything without having to be asked twice. I almost brought up the job again. I didn't. It felt like the wrong week for it, with the rent notice still sitting on the counter and her dad's voice still hanging somewhere in the room. That was the pattern that whole month, though neither of us named it out loud. We started choosing our moments so carefully that we stopped choosing any moment at all. I didn't mention the listing again. She didn't ask if I'd applied. We just moved around the subject like it was a piece of furniture we'd both silently agreed not to bump into. Dinner got quieter. Not cold. Exactly. She still asked about my day. I still asked about hers. But the questions got smaller, safer. How was traffic? Did you eat lunch? Nothing that risked landing somewhere neither of us wanted to go. One night in early April, we were watching something on the couch, her feet in my lap out of habit more than affection at that point, when she said, out of nowhere, "You've been quiet lately. Just tired." That's what you always say. It's usually true. She didn't push it. She pulled her feet back, tucked them under herself instead, a small movement that probably meant nothing and probably meant everything. I noticed it the way you notice a change in weather before you can name what's different. The air just feels off, and you adjust your plans without fully understanding why. I applied for the job 2 days later. Didn't tell her. Told myself I'd bring it up once I actually had an offer. Once it was a real thing instead of another maybe she could talk me out of before it existed. I didn't think of it as hiding something from her. I thought of it as protecting a decision I hadn't finished making. It didn't occur to me until much later, long after the boxes, long after the empty rectangles on the wall, that those were probably the exact same thing. The interview email came on a Friday afternoon while Mara was still at work. I read it twice, then a third time, my hand tightening slightly around my phone. They wanted to see me Monday. I sat there in the empty apartment for a long moment, phone screen slowly dimming in my hand, trying to figure out how, or whether, To tell the woman I loved that I'd just taken the first real step toward the exact thing she'd already told me she was afraid of. I didn't tell Mara about the interview until Sunday night, and even then, I didn't tell her all of it. I had a thing on Monday, I said, loading the dishwasher, not looking at her. An interview. For that ops strategy role. She was quiet long enough that I turned around. How'd it go? Not what I expected. No anger, no immediate list of financial concerns. Just the question, flat, like she was asking about a dentist appointment. Good, I think. They said they'd follow up this week. Okay. She went back to wiping down the counter. Good. That word, good, sat there between us doing nothing. It wasn't approval. It wasn't disapproval either. It was the sound of a door closing softly enough that you almost didn't hear the latch catch. Things got smaller after that. I noticed it first in the mornings. She used to leave before me most days, but now she started leaving earlier, coffee in a to-go cup instead of drinking it at the table like she used to. I told myself it was the new schedule at the clinic. Maybe it was. I didn't ask. Text messages changed too. She used to send me stupid things during the day. A picture of a dog she saw on her walk to the parking garage. A complaint about a co-worker's microwave habits. Those stopped. What replaced them were logistics. Can you grab milk? Running late. Don't wait on dinner. Functional. Efficient. The texts of two people running a household, not two people in love with each other. One Wednesday I got home and found her sitting on the couch with her laptop, a spreadsheet open, columns of numbers I didn't recognize at first. What's that? Just looking at budgets. She didn't close it, but she did angle the screen slightly, an inch, maybe two. Small enough that she probably didn't even notice she'd done it. In case. In case of what? In case things change. She glanced up at me, and there was something careful in her face, like she was deciding how much to say. I like to know where we'd stand. I wanted to ask her directly. Are we okay? Is this still us? Do you regret this? But the words felt too big for a Wednesday evening with dinner not yet started and a spreadsheet still glowing on her screen. So instead I said, you want me to order Thai? Sure, she said. Whatever's easy. We ate on the couch that night, plates balanced on our knees, the TV filling the silence neither of us wanted to name. At one point her hand rested near mine on the cushion between us, and I remember thinking about reaching over, and I remember deciding not to, and I still don't fully know why. Maybe I was scared of what would happen if she pulled away. Maybe some part of me had already started pulling away first, just to get there before she did. She started sleeping at her sister Renee's place on Thursdays. Girls' night. She called it the first time, and I believed her, because there was no reason not to. By the third Thursday, it had stopped being an event and started being a routine, the kind you don't question anymore, because questioning it means admitting something's wrong. I filled those Thursdays by staying late at work, mostly because the apartment felt too big and too quiet without her in it, even though she'd only ever taken up half the space to begin with. Neither of us said the word breakup. Neither of us said the word future. We just kept moving through the days like two people carefully avoiding a conversation they both knew was coming, hoping maybe if they waited long enough, the conversation would lose interest and leave on its own. It didn't. The email came on a Tuesday morning while I was still in bed, Mara already gone, coffee mug rinsed and upside down in the drying rack the way she always left it. Congratulations. We are pleased to offer you the position of Senior Operations Strategist. I read it 4 times before I let myself believe it. Then I sat there on the edge of the bed for a long minute, phone in both hands, feeling something I hadn't felt in longer than I wanted to admit. Pride, clean and uncomplicated, before anything else got tangled into it. I told her that night. I'd planned to wait for a good moment, but there wasn't one, so I just said it while she was putting away groceries, the same way she'd once caught me looking at job listings from across the same kitchen. I got the offer. She stopped, a box of pasta in one hand, and for a second her face did something complicated, something that might have been happiness trying to fight its way through something else. That's great, she said. The words were right. The voice underneath them wasn't. Is it though? What do you mean, is it? Of course it is. I'm proud of you. She set the pasta down harder than she needed to. I am. When does it start? 3 weeks. And the pay cut kicks in immediately? Or is there a ramp up? Immediately. There's an equity component that vests after a year, but yeah, immediately. She nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're trying to look like they're absorbing information calmly, while something inside them is doing the opposite. Okay, she said. We'll figure it out. You don't sound like you believe that. I didn't say I didn't believe it. I said we'd figure it out. Her voice climbed half a register, not quite anger, something more like fear wearing anger's clothes. Do you know what it's like to watch someone make a decision like this and just have to trust it works out? Because I've watched that before, Daniel. I watched my dad do that twice. I know exactly how the ending looks when it doesn't work. I'm not your dad. I know you're not. That's not what She stopped herself, pressed her lips together, started again. I want to be excited for you. I do. But excitement isn't the only thing I'm allowed to feel right now. So what do you feel? She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face settled, like she'd finally stopped trying to arrange her expression into something more comfortable. Scared, she said. I feel scared, and I'm tired of feeling like the only one who's allowed to say that out loud in this relationship. You think I'm not scared? I think you're excited, and underneath the excited you're probably scared too, but you're not showing me that part. You're showing me the part that already decided. And I never got a vote. You've had a vote this whole time. Not really. Her voice dropped, quiet now, which was somehow worse than if she'd been shouting. You applied without telling me. You interviewed without telling me. I found out this was actually happening the same day it became impossible to change. I didn't have a defense for that, because she was right, and both of us knew it. I don't think I can keep doing this, she said. The words landed soft, almost gentle, the way you deliver news you'd already made peace with somewhere private, weeks ago, and were only now getting around to saying out loud. Doing what? I said, even though I already knew. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at the box of pasta still sitting on the counter between us, like it had suddenly become the most important object in the room, and I understood, somewhere in my chest before I understood it anywhere else, that we had just crossed into territory we weren't coming back from. The photos had already started coming down that same night, right after she said she couldn't keep doing this. I'd stood in the doorway and watched her take the Sedona one off the wall before either of us said another word. What I hadn't known yet was how long it would actually take to finish emptying an apartment we'd shared for the better part of 2 years. I'd like to say we tried to fix it in the days after. We didn't, not really. We had one more real conversation, 2 days later, shorter than the one that started it, mostly logistics. Who'd stay in the apartment through the end of the lease, who'd take the couch, whether we'd tell people or just let it become obvious over time. Neither of us cried during that one. I think we'd both used up whatever tears the situation had coming during that first night. It took 11 days total. 11 days of boxes stacked against walls that used to hold photographs. 11 days of dividing a shared life into 2 piles using a logic that made sense on paper and felt insane in practice. This pot is mine because I bought it. This blanket is yours because your mother gave it to you. This coffee table we bought together on a whim from a stranger's yard sale, and neither of us wants it, so it goes to Goodwill. We were mostly civil. That was somehow the hardest part. If we'd screamed at each other, I think it would have been easier to walk away angry, and anger is easier to carry than grief. Instead, we were polite, careful, occasionally even kind, passing each other in the hallway with boxes in our arms, saying excuse me like roommates instead of 2 people who used to fall asleep with their legs tangled together. On the last night, she stood by the door with her final bag, keys in her hand. The extra set I'd had made for her the week we moved in, back when giving someone a key still felt like the biggest promise you knew how to make. I'm going to leave this on the counter, she said. You don't have to. I think I do. She set it down anyway, next to the empty fruit bowl neither of us had ever really used. I don't know how to hold on to a key to a place I'm not living in anymore. Mara. She turned back at the door, and for a second I thought she might say something that would change the shape of the whole night. I'm sorry, or I still love you, or maybe we're making a mistake. She didn't say any of it. Good luck with the job, she said instead. I mean that. I really do. Then she was gone, and the door clicked shut behind her the same quiet way it always had, and I stood there in an apartment that suddenly felt 3 times too big, staring at a set of keys on the counter that nobody was ever going to use again. I didn't cry that night either. I just sat down on the floor with my back against the kitchen cabinets, in the exact spot where the coffee table used to sit, and stayed there for a long time, not really thinking about anything, just breathing in a silence that had a shape to it now, heavy and specific, the kind of silence that only exists in a room where 2 people used to be. The studio on Colfax was smaller than anywhere I'd lived since college, and for the first month, I barely unpacked it. One box sat in the corner of the living room for almost 3 weeks, taped shut, my handwriting on the side in fading marker. Books, miscellaneous. I walked past it every day. I told myself I'd get to it eventually. I think some part of me knew that unpacking it meant admitting I actually lived there now, alone, and I wasn't ready to admit that yet. The new job started on schedule. I showed up the first Monday in a shirt I'd ironed twice out of nerves, sat through an orientation that felt like it was happening to someone else, and went home that night to an apartment with no couch yet, just a mattress on the floor and a folding chair I'd bought at Target because it was cheap and I didn't trust myself to make bigger decisions about furniture yet. I ate a lot of dinners standing up at the kitchen counter that first month. Cereal some nights, because it required nothing of me. I left the TV on sometimes even when I wasn't watching it, just for the noise, just so the apartment didn't feel as empty as it actually was. I didn't reach out to Mara. She didn't reach out to me. A mutual friend mentioned once, at a birthday thing I almost skipped, that she was doing okay, staying with Renee for now, looking at her own place. I nodded and said that was good and changed the subject before the conversation could go anywhere I wasn't ready for it to go. Work gave me somewhere to put my attention, which helped more than I expected. My new manager, a woman named Priya who talked fast and didn't waste time on small talk, put me on a project in my second week that actually used the parts of my brain that had gone soft over 4 years of the same routine at the old job. I stayed late some nights not because I had to, but because the alternative was going home to a box that still said books, miscellaneous on the side of it. A coworker named Marcus invited me to a Saturday hiking group about 3 weeks in. I almost said no. I'd built up a decent case for staying home. Tired, busy, don't really know anyone. But something in me, some small stubborn thing that hadn't fully given up yet, said yes instead. We hiked somewhere out past Golden, a trail that climbed hard for the first mile, and then leveled out into something almost peaceful. Nobody on that hike knew about Mara, about the vacation photos, about any of it. To them I was just the new guy from Ops, decent pace, quiet, but not unfriendly. It was the first time in weeks I'd existed as something other than a man in the middle of a breakup, and it felt strange in a way I didn't have words for yet, like trying on a piece of clothing that used to fit and discovering it still did. I got home that evening tired in the good way, legs sore, skin sun-warm, and for the first time since moving in, I looked at that box in the corner and didn't feel the usual weight settle over me at the sight of it. I got a knife from the kitchen drawer and cut the tape. Books first. Then an old photo album I didn't remember packing, one from before Mara, college years, faces I hadn't thought about in a long time. I sat on the floor of my new apartment for almost an hour, going through it page by page, and somewhere in that hour I realized I hadn't checked my phone once to see if she'd texted. It wasn't healing exactly. Not yet. But it was something close to the beginning of it, small and quiet, the kind of change nobody notices happening until it already has. Marcus texted every Wednesday like clockwork. Hiking this weekend if you're in. Golden Trailhead, 8 a.m. I said yes more often than I said no, which surprised me more than it probably should have. There was something about the routine of it, the same gravel parking lot, the same 3 or 4 guys from work, the same argument about whether to stop for breakfast burritos before or after, that gave my week a shape it hadn't had in months. Nobody in that group asked about Mara. Not because I told them not to. They just didn't know there was anything to ask about. To them, I was just Daniel from Ops, the new guy, decent uphill pace, quiet until you got him talking about something he actually cared about. You seeing anybody? Marcus asked one Saturday, maybe 6 weeks in, both of us catching our breath at a switchback with a view of the whole valley opening up beneath us. No. Was with someone for a while. Ended a few months back. Rough. Yeah. I looked out at the valley instead of at him. Wasn't ugly, though. Just over. Those are the worst kind, honestly. Easier to be mad at somebody than to just miss them. I thought about that the rest of the hike. He wasn't wrong. Anger had a shelf life. It gave you something to do with your hands. Missing somebody didn't give you anything. It just sat there, quiet, showing up at strange times, a grocery store aisle, a song on the radio, the specific blue of a Trader Joe's bag that used to sit on our kitchen counter every Sunday. I left my phone in the car most Saturdays after that conversation. Not as some grand gesture. Just an experiment, at first, to see what it felt like to go 4 or 5 hours without checking whether anybody had texted. It felt strange the first time, itchy almost, like an habit I hadn't realized I'd built. By the 3rd Saturday, it barely registered. I got home from one of those hikes on a Saturday evening in early fall, legs sore in the good way, and stood in the middle of the living room looking at the mattress still on the floor and the folding chair still doing double duty as a dining chair and a place to hang my jacket. It occurred to me, for the first time since moving in, that the apartment might be worth actually living in instead of just staying in. The next weekend I bought a couch. Nothing fancy, secondhand, off a listing from a woman 2 buildings over who was moving out of state and just wanted it gone. Marcus helped me carry it up 3 flights, complaining the whole way, and afterward we ate pizza straight out of the box on it, because I still didn't own plates that matched. "This is a good couch," he said, like it was a real accomplishment. "It's a couch, man. It's a couch you picked out yourself. That's different from a couch that just ended up in your apartment because somebody else picked it." I didn't say anything to that, but I thought about it longer than I let on. He wasn't wrong. Every piece of furniture on Sherman Street had been chosen by both of us, or more honestly, mostly by Mara, with me nodding along because I didn't have strong opinions about throw pillows. This one was mine, bad armrest and all. It wasn't healing, not all the way, but it was one more thing that belonged to nobody but me. And somewhere over the last few months, without any single moment I could point to, those small things had started adding up into something that felt a little bit like a life. Priya put me on the warehouse routing project in my 3rd week, mostly because nobody else wanted it. "It's a mess," she told me, handing over a folder thick enough to double as a doorstop. 3 years of patchwork fixes nobody had time to actually solve. See what you can do with it. I spent the first 2 weeks just reading. Old emails, old spreadsheets, half-finished proposals from people who'd since left the company. The problem wasn't complicated once you sat with it long enough. It was 3 regional warehouses running on 3 different systems that didn't talk to each other, costing the company real money every month in duplicated shipments and wasted mileage. Nobody had fixed it because fixing it meant convincing 3 regional managers to give up systems they'd built themselves and were proud of. I sketched the first version of a solution on the whiteboard in the small conference room on a Thursday afternoon, half out of genuine interest and half because I needed somewhere to put the restlessness that still showed up most evenings when the apartment got too quiet. Priya walked by, stopped, backed up. "What is this?" "Just messing around with the routing thing." She studied it for a long minute, arms crossed, the way she did when she was actually thinking instead of just being polite. "This is good, Daniel. This is actually good." I didn't know what to do with the compliment. I think I mumbled something about it still needing work, deflecting the way I'd gotten used to doing, the way you do when you've spent a long time hearing that your ideas were probably fine, but not exceptional. "I'm serious," she said. "Clean it up. I want to show this to leadership next month." I went home that night and told nobody, because there wasn't really anybody to tell. I thought briefly, involuntarily, about calling Mara, the old reflex still there even months later. She would have made a big deal out of it, ordered something to celebrate, asked a dozen follow-up questions. I sat with that thought for a second, let it pass through me instead of grabbing onto it. And then I just poured myself a beer and sat on my new secondhand couch and let the quiet feel less like absence and more like just quiet. Over the next few weeks, I rebuilt the whiteboard sketch into something real, a full proposal, numbers attached, a rollout plan that didn't ask any regional manager to feel like they'd failed. I stayed late more nights than not because Priya asked me to, but because the work had become the thing I actually wanted to be doing. "You're presenting this to leadership yourself," Priya told me on a Tuesday. "Not me. You built it. You own it. I've never presented to anyone above a director." "Then this'll be a good first time." She smiled, not unkindly. "You'll be fine. The work speaks for itself." I wanted to believe her completely. Some part of me did. But there was another part, older, quieter, the part that still occasionally heard my father's voice calling me, still figuring things out at family dinners I hadn't attended in over a year, and that part didn't fully believe anything yet. Not without proof. The presentation got scheduled for the following month. I put it on my calendar and tried not to think about it too much in the weeks leading up, though of course I thought about it constantly, in the shower, on hikes, in the 10 minutes before falling asleep every night, running through the numbers, rehearsing answers to questions nobody had asked me yet. The presentation room had a window that looked out over the parking garage, and I remember focusing on that window more than I should have during the first 3 minutes, because looking at the actual people in the room made my hands sweat. It started fine. The numbers were solid. Priya had helped me trim the deck down to something clean, no filler slides, no unnecessary charts. But about halfway through, one of the regional managers, a guy named Foster, maybe 50, arms crossed the entire time, interrupted with a question I hadn't fully prepared for. "This assumes we can migrate the Denver warehouse system in under 60 days. Where's that number coming from?" I fumbled it. "Not completely, but enough." I gave an answer that sounded confident on the surface and hollow underneath it, and I could see in Foster's face that he heard the hollow part too. "That seems optimistic," he said, not unkindly, but not gently either. The rest of the presentation went fine on paper. Polite nods, a few genuine questions, Priya stepping in once to reinforce a point I'd underexplained. But I walked out of that room feeling like I'd fumbled something important, and the feeling followed me the rest of the day, sitting at my desk pretending to work while replaying Foster's question over and over, hearing my own answer get smaller and weaker each time I ran it back. Priya found me at my desk around 5. "You okay? I think I blew the migration timeline question." "You didn't blow it. You gave an answer that wasn't fully baked yet." "Different thing." She leaned against the edge of my cubicle. "Foster asks that question to everybody. He's not trying to embarrass you. He's trying to figure out if you've actually stress-tested your own plan." "Have I? Have you?" I sat with that for a second. "Not enough." "Then go do that." Nobody remembers the guy who had a rough answer in a first pitch. They remember the guy who came back with a better one. I went home that night carrying something heavier than disappointment, something closer to the old familiar shape of not being enough, the same shape I used to feel walking into my father's living room. For a moment, sitting on my couch with my laptop still open to the half-finished revision, I caught myself wanting to call Mara, not even to talk about the presentation specifically, just to hear a voice that used to make hard days feel smaller. I didn't call her. I opened the migration timeline instead, pulled up the actual logistics data from the Denver warehouse, and started stress-testing my own assumptions the way I should have done the first time. It took me most of the weekend. I skipped the Saturday hike, which Marcus gave me grief about over text, but I didn't mind. Somewhere around Sunday evening, staring at a spreadsheet with 60 small revisions layered into it, I realized I wasn't doing this to prove Foster wrong, or to prove my father wrong, or even to prove Mara wrong. I was doing it because I actually wanted to get it right. That distinction mattered more than I expected it to. I asked for a second meeting with Foster alone before taking anything back to the full leadership group. He looked surprised when I showed up at his desk, a printed version of the revised timeline in hand instead of a slide deck. "You didn't have to redo the whole thing," he said, flipping through it. "I wanted to answer your question properly, not just defend the version I already had." He read through it slower than I expected, asking a few sharp follow-ups along the way, the kind of questions that would have rattled me a month earlier. This time I had answers, not because I'd memorized talking points, but because I'd actually done the work underneath them. "This is a real plan," he said finally, setting the pages down. "The first version wasn't. This one is. Appreciate you saying that. I wasn't trying to make you sweat in that meeting, for what it's worth. I just don't sign off on things that sound good and fall apart in month 2. I get that now." He nodded, something almost like respect settling into his face. "Bring this back to the group. I'll back it." The second presentation went differently. Not perfectly. Foster still asked hard questions, and one of the other regional managers raised a concern about staffing during the transition that took an extra week to fully resolve. But the room felt different underneath me this time. I wasn't performing confidence I didn't have. I actually had it, because I'd earned it the slow way, the only way it seems to actually stick. Leadership approved the rollout 2 weeks later. I told Marcus over beers that weekend, and he raised his glass in an exaggerated toast that made me laugh for the first time in longer than I'd noticed. I didn't call my father. I thought about it, briefly, the way you think about calling someone out of old habit rather than actual need, and then I let the thought pass without acting on it. I didn't think about calling Mara either. That was the part that actually surprised me, sitting there with a beer in my hand and Marcus telling some unrelated story about his dog. I couldn't have told you exactly when the reflex had stopped. It just had, quietly, the way most healing seems to work, without an announcement, without anyone noticing until it's already done. I drove home that night with the windows down, the early summer air thick with the smell of somebody's grill a few blocks over. And for the first time since the boxes and the empty rectangles on the wall, I felt something that wasn't relief and wasn't happiness exactly, but sat somewhere close to both of them. I felt like myself, not the version of myself that needed someone else's belief to feel steady. Just myself, standing on ground I'd built one uneven step at a time, without waiting for anybody's permission to stand there. It would be another few months before I heard anything about Mara again. When I did, it would happen in the most ordinary way possible. No dramatic phone call, no chance encounter engineered by fate. Just 2 coworkers talking over lunch in a building she happened to be sitting close enough to hear. But that hadn't happened yet. For now, There was just the drive home, the windows down, and a version of my life that finally felt like it belonged to me. The email from HR came on a Monday, subject line plain enough that I almost skipped past it in my inbox. Title change effective July 1st. Senior Operations Strategist became Operations Strategy Lead. Not a dramatic jump. No corner office. No company car. Nothing that would make for an impressive story at a party. But it came with a real bump in pay, enough to more than close the gap from the cut I'd taken almost a year earlier, and it came with something that mattered more than the money. My name attached to the routing system that was now live across all 3 warehouses, saving the company real dollars every month instead of just theoretical ones on a slide. Priya took me and 2 other people on the project out for lunch to celebrate. Some Vietnamese place a few blocks from the office that Foster apparently swore by. Foster came too, which surprised me a little, and spent most of the meal telling a story about a warehouse disaster from 15 years earlier that made the whole table laugh harder than it probably deserved. "You should be proud of this," Priya said at one point, gesturing vaguely with her chopsticks. "A year ago you were the new guy asking where the bathroom was. Still feel like that guy most days. That's normal. Means you're paying attention." She smiled. "The ones who stop feeling that way are the ones I worry about." I drove home that afternoon with the radio on, windows cracked, feeling something settle in my chest that had taken the better part of a year to arrive. It wasn't triumph, exactly. It was steadier than that. Quieter. The kind of feeling that comes from knowing you built something with your own hands instead of being handed it. I still thought about Mara sometimes. Less than before. It had become less of an ache and more of an occasional visitor. A song on the radio. The smell of a particular Thai restaurant we used to order from. The sight of a couple arguing quietly in a parking lot in a way that reminded me of the version of us that used to argue that same careful way. I didn't reach for my phone when those moments hit anymore. I just let them pass through and kept driving. What I didn't know that Monday, driving home with the windows down, was that Mara had started a new job 3 months earlier at a healthcare network downtown. One that happened to lease office space in the building next door to mine. A detail neither of us could have planned or predicted. The kind of coincidence that happens constantly in a city the size of Denver without meaning anything cosmic at all. Just 2 people, working next door to each other, moving through overlapping days without knowing it yet. She'd mentioned once to Renee, months back, that she liked the new job. Steadier hours, better benefits, a commute that let her avoid the worst of the highway traffic. Small, unremarkable facts that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with a life she was quietly rebuilding on her own terms, the same slow way I'd been rebuilding mine. Neither of us knew how close we already were. Mara sat 2 tables away in the food court downstairs from her building, waiting on a salad she'd ordered from the place that always took too long, half listening to a work conversation happening at the table behind her. She wasn't trying to listen. That's the part she'd tell me later, more than once, like she needed me to believe it. She was just scrolling her phone, waiting for her name to be called, and the conversation behind her happened to be loud enough to hear without meaning to. "No, seriously, the whole routing system Daniel built last year is still saving us I don't even know how much a month," one voice said. A man's voice, one she didn't recognize. "Reyes? Yeah, he just got the lead title for it," a second voice answered. "Foster wouldn't shut up about it at lunch last week. Guy came in with basically nothing and turned the whole warehouse mess around in under a year." Mara said later that she didn't move for a full 10 seconds. Just sat there with her phone in her hand, doing nothing, the screen going dim from inactivity while 2 strangers kept talking about a man she used to know better than anyone, using his full name like it belonged to someone important, someone whose work actually mattered to the people around him. She told me it wasn't the promotion itself that got her. It was the casualness of it. The fact that 2 coworkers were talking about my work the same easy way people talk about weather or traffic, like my competence was simply an accepted fact in that building, unremarkable, assumed. Not a maybe, not a total leap, just a fact. Her name got called for the salad before the conversation moved on to something else. She picked it up, sat back down at her table, and didn't eat more than 3 bites of it. According to what she told me weeks later, sitting across from me in a different kind of conversation entirely. I didn't know any of this happened until almost 2 weeks after it did. The actual meeting between us happened on a Thursday evening, in the parking garage that served both buildings, of all places. Unglamorous, fluorescent lit, smelling faintly of exhaust and concrete. I was heading to my car after a long day. She was heading to hers, 3 rows over, and we saw each other at almost the exact same moment, both of us stopping mid-step like we'd walked into an invisible wall. Daniel. Mara. Her name still felt strange in my mouth after all that time, familiar and foreign at once. I didn't know you worked around here. Started a few months ago. Grandview Health, the building next door. She shifted her bag on her shoulder, a small nervous movement I remembered from years of watching her do it before hard conversations. I heard about the promotion. A couple weeks back. Some guys were talking about it at lunch. Small world. Smaller than I realized, apparently. A short laugh escaped her, not quite comfortable, more like a release valve for something bigger she wasn't ready to say yet. Congratulations, by the way. I mean that. Thanks. I shifted my own weight, feeling the strange formality settle over both of us. Two people who used to know each other's coffee orders, now standing 8 feet apart in a parking garage like acquaintances from a wedding they barely remembered attending together. How have you been? Good. Getting there. She looked at me for a second longer than the question required. You look different. Different how? I don't know. Steadier maybe. She said it quietly, almost to herself. It's a good look on you. Neither of us moved toward our cars for a long moment. The garage held its usual sounds around us. An engine starting somewhere on the level below, a door alarm chirping, the distant hum of the highway just beyond the concrete walls, and inside all of it, the two of us stood there not quite finished with whatever this moment was asking of us. Would you want to get coffee sometime? She asked finally. Not. I don't mean anything by it. I just think there's stuff I never said that I probably should have. I thought about the version of myself from a year earlier, the one who would have said yes too fast, desperate for whatever crumb of her attention was on offer. This version of me took a breath first. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. We met that Saturday at a place near her new apartment, small, quiet, the kind of coffee shop that plays music low enough you have to lean in slightly to hear each other over it. She got there first. I saw her through the window before I went in, sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from yet, and for a second I just stood on the sidewalk letting myself feel whatever this was going to be before I walked in and let it start. Hey, she said when I sat down. Hey. We did the small talk first, the way you do, work and weather and how Renee was doing. Both of us circling the actual conversation like it needed a running start. It was Mara who finally cut through it, setting her mug down with both hands still around it. I've thought a lot about that night, she said. The photos. All of it. Me too. I want to say something, and I need you to just let me get through it. Because I've rehearsed this about 4 different times, and I'll lose my nerve if you interrupt. I nodded, and she took a breath. I wasn't scared of you failing, she said. Not really. I told myself that's what it was, but it wasn't true. I was scared of watching someone I loved take a risk and not being able to stop it, the way I couldn't stop it with my dad. Twice. I grew up believing that if I just controlled enough variables, disaster wouldn't happen again. And when you started talking about the new job, some part of me panicked because it felt like watching the same movie start over, and I didn't know how to tell you that without it sounding like an insult to you instead of what it actually was. Which was what? Fear that had nothing to do with you. She looked down at the mug. I made it about your dream because that felt safer than admitting it was about my dad's failure. It was easier to tell you I didn't trust the plan than to tell you I didn't trust the world not to take something else away from me. I sat with that for a moment, turning it over. You told me that night you'd almost left 3 times before, I said. I never asked you about that. I think I was scared of the answer. The first time was after my dad's second call about the truck, back when you were still just talking about maybe switching teams internally. The second was after the rent notice came, when I did the math on both our salaries at once and panicked. The third was the night I found the job listing still open on your laptop. She shook her head slightly. I talked myself out of all 3 because I kept telling myself I was overreacting. By the night of the offer, I didn't have anything left to talk myself out of it with. I needed you to believe in me, I said, finally. More than I think I ever admitted, even to myself. My dad spent 30 years making me feel like I was always about to disappoint him, and somewhere along the way I think I decided your belief was the thing that would finally prove him wrong. When you couldn't give me that, it didn't just feel like doubt. It felt like a verdict. That's a lot of weight to put on one person. I know that now. Took me the better part of a year alone to figure it out. I turned my own mug slowly on the table, not really looking at her. I don't think I need that from anyone anymore. Not the way I used to. That's probably the only good thing to come out of all this. She smiled, small, a little sad around the edges. That's not nothing though. That's actually pretty huge. Feels less huge and more like just finally growing up. Same thing, probably. She wrapped both hands tighter around the mug. I'm not saying any of this to ask for something back, for what it's worth. I don't expect you to I don't know. I just needed you to know it wasn't about you not being enough. It was never that. It was about me being scared of something that had nothing to do with you, and letting that fear talk instead of me. I appreciate you saying that. I should have said it 10 months ago. Maybe, I said. Or maybe neither of us was ready to hear it 10 months ago. I don't know if I would have understood any of what you're saying if you'd said it back then. I was still too busy trying to prove something. She looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her eyes. So where does that leave us? She asked. Honestly, I don't know yet. It was the truest thing I'd said all afternoon. I don't think I'm ready to pretend the last 10 months didn't happen. But I don't hate you, Mara. I don't think I ever really did, even at the worst of it. I think I was just grieving something I wasn't ready to lose. I was grieving it too, she said quietly, even though I'm the one who left. Neither of us reached for anything more definite than that. No promises. No plans for a second date disguised as a conversation. Just two people who'd hurt each other without meaning to, sitting in a quiet coffee shop, finally saying the things that might have changed something if they'd been said a year earlier, and might still change something now, slowly, if either of them let it. 3 months later, I hung a photo on the wall of my apartment for the first time since moving in. It wasn't the Sedona one. That one stayed wherever it ended up after the split, in a box somewhere, maybe, or thrown out. I genuinely didn't know and had stopped needing to know. This was a new one, taken on a hike out past Golden with Marcus and the rest of the group. The whole valley spread out gold and green behind us. Everybody squinting into the sun and laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore by the time I got the print made. Mara and I talked occasionally after that Saturday at the coffee shop. Nothing dramatic. A text every few weeks, an actual phone call once when her father's truck broke down again, and she needed someone who already understood the whole complicated history behind that particular kind of tired. We weren't back together. I want to be honest about that, because I know how these stories are supposed to end, with the two people finding their way back to each other in some grand, satisfying arc. That's not quite what happened. What happened was smaller and, I think, more honest than that. We became two people who used to matter enormously to each other and had figured out how to matter to each other in a smaller, steadier way instead. Maybe that changes someday. Maybe it doesn't. I've stopped needing to know the ending in advance, which is its own kind of growth I wouldn't have predicted a year ago. I still run into Foster most weeks, usually in a meeting or passing through the warehouse floor. He still tells the same disaster story every few months like it's the first time he's ever told it. And I still laugh in the right places because by now it feels rude not to. Priya moved up to director last spring and took half the team with her, myself included, into a wing of the building with actual windows. Some evenings I still catch myself thinking about the apartment on Sherman Street, the sticky notes on the mirror, the lasagna every third Sunday. I don't think those memories are going anywhere, and I've made a kind of peace with that. They don't hurt the way they used to. They just sit there, quiet, like most memories eventually learn to do. My father called a few weeks ago, out of nowhere, said he'd heard from an old family friend that I'd gotten some kind of promotion. He didn't say much else about it. That's not really how he operates. But there was something in his voice, a small crack of something that might have been pride, that I decided to just let be what it was without needing more from it. I hung the new photo on a nail I put in myself, stepped back, and looked at it for a while. Not the Sedona sunset. Not a wall full of somebody else's approval. Just one photo of a version of my life I'd actually built, uneven step by uneven step, without waiting for anyone's permission to believe it mattered. It was enough. Some nights, standing there in that small apartment with the evening light coming through the window, it felt like more than enough.